Hi, and welcome to 7 Steps to Building a Profitable Voice of the Customer program, a one-to-one webinar sponsored by Market Tools. I'm Tom Hoffman at One-to-One Media, and I'll be the moderator for today's event, where we'll be exploring one company's journey to creating and sustaining an effective Voice of the Customer program. This includes the challenges they've had to overcome along the way and the business benefits that the program has delivered. Our speakers today are Seth Hall, Vice President of Customer Service at Philadelphia Insurance Companies, and Greg Merrick, Vice President of Corporate Marketing at Market Tools. Seth and Greg, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Tom.
Glad to be here.
Before I review the full agenda, let's take a walk through the On24 interface. To start, we highly recommend that you turn off your pop-up blockers in order to participate in today's survey. For a PDF copy of today's presentation, please click on the green PDF icon. If you encounter any issues with the PDF download, please let us know by clicking on the yellow question mark for help with this or any other technical issues. If you have a question for one of our presenters, please click on the red Q&A icon, then enter your question, and then hit submit. Contact information for Market Tools and for One-to-One Media will be posted at the end of our event. Also, feel free to tweet about today's webinar using the Twitter hashtag that's shown here. Finally, as a reminder, all attendees will receive an email with a link to the archived version of this webinar. Now for today's agenda. In this webinar, our presenters will provide insights on the following: recommendations for getting started with a Voice of the Customer program, including the key components that are necessary for developing a successful and sustainable program. We'll also explore steps for leveraging the feedback that customers share and how to apply it. We'll examine the types of customer feedback that's most applicable for meeting your organization's strategic goals. We'll also discuss the criticality of gaining buy-in from key stakeholders and ways to achieve this. We'll also consider best practices for aligning Voice of the Customer goals to performance metrics. We'll evaluate the benefits of creating a closed-loop system for informing customers that their input has been received and how it's been acted on. And then finally, we'll examine the type of functionality and features that decision makers should look for in enterprise feedback management tools. This will be followed by an audience Q&A with our speakers and our post-event survey. Now for a bit more about today's speakers. Our first speaker today is Seth Hall, Vice President of Customer Service at Philadelphia Insurance Companies. Seth has more than 15 years of service operations experience, predominantly in the healthcare and property and casualty insurance industries. Seth has particular expertise in continuous improvement programs, developing service-focused cultures, and Voice of the Customer programs. In his spare time, Seth volunteers as a mentor with Mastery Charter School in Philadelphia and has completed 4 Ironman competitions. Seth, thanks so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Sure. So also joining us today is Greg Merrick, Vice President of Corporate Marketing at Market Tools, where Greg leads all marketing communications and product marketing activities. Greg has more than 20 years of experience in both B2B and B2C marketing, and he's held senior-level marketing roles at leading companies including Citrix Systems, Intuit, and Oracle. Greg, thank you for joining us as well.
Thanks for having me, Tom, and I also like to welcome Seth.
So as a prelude to Seth's presentation on the steps for building a profitable Voice of the Customer program, I'd like to start by talking a little bit about the rationale for developing one. In light of the current market conditions, it's become more critical than ever for companies to attract and to try to retain high-value customers. According to research conducted by Peppers & Rogers Group, it's becoming increasingly difficult for companies to differentiate themselves by product. Ultimately, the most innovative companies, companies such as Apple and Amazon, are able to differentiate themselves by the quality and the consistency of the customer experiences that they deliver. In order to do this effectively, decision makers need to make use of the full range of customer insights that are available to them in order to be able to tailor experiences for customers and to help develop relevant and targeted offers as well. This includes gathering behavioral insights about customers through their transactions and also through their channel usage. Companies can also analyze reams of unstructured data that help to indicate customer sentiments and preferences that are shared in social media and in the contact center and in other channels as well. Companies also rely on customer surveys or other feedback mechanisms to learn what customers want. And while these insights can be invaluable in helping companies to improve the customer experience and to boost financial performance, apparently there's still quite a bit of room for improvement for many Voice of the Customer programs. According to a survey by Forrester Research earlier this year among members of its customer experience peer research panel. While the majority of the Forrester survey respondents say that their Voice of the Customer programs are improving customer experience, more than half of the respondents say that they're seeing gaps between their Voice of the Customer programs and the financial benefits aren't being delivered or are being underdelivered. The likely causes for these types of disconnects, according to Forrester analyst Andrew McInnes, may be that many companies aren't doing the right things in making improvements to the customer experience to drive business value. And another likely reason is that companies simply might not be measuring the right things to demonstrate the business value of customer experience. Seth is going to enlighten us on how to develop a successful and sustainable Voice of the Customer program from end to end that has enabled Philadelphia insurance companies to avoid these types of disconnects. And Seth, I thought I'd start off by asking you if you could tell us about Philadelphia insurance companies and the drivers that prompted the organization to begin its Voice of the Customer journey.
I'd be glad to. Philadelphia Insurance Companies is a property and casualty insurance carrier, and as you can see on the slide, we were founded in 1962. We have 46 offices and close to 1,600 employees in all major U.S. markets, and we have over 80 niche business insurance solutions. We have products like nonprofits and sports, cyber liability, parks and recreation, human services. So we really do focus in on that niche market. And as you can see, we've been a member of Ward's Top 50 and National Underwriter Top 100 Insurance Companies for many, many years, and have an A++ AM Best rating, which obviously we are very proud of. So all very good things. The company overall, over the course of the last 50 years, has been very successful. However, we are in a very similar predicament, as I'm sure most of the listeners are, in that we are faced with very difficult market conditions, and pricing has become certainly very competitive. Products are being copied and replicated, and we all of a sudden we're scratching our heads saying we really need a different differentiator for us in the marketplace. And that was really the impetus for us to say we have all of this customer data out there. We know we do. We're capturing it. We're not using it, but we're capturing it, and we're not really utilizing it to the fullest extent. And so we realized that this is something that cannot be commoditized. No one has our customer feedback, and we knew that there was an opportunity to leverage it, to gain some valuable insights, to make significant business changes that would help sort of the bottom line. And so we then decided to launch this voice of the customer journey, if you will.
Okay, thanks. So, Seth, what types of customer feedback do you solicit?
So the way we think about feedback is really in two ways. There's the structured and the unstructured feedback, and right now where we are is predominantly focused on that structured feedback. So on the slide you can see both the direct and indirect, and we're focused in on both areas. So when I think of structured feedback, I'm thinking about data that is organized in some sort of logical way or in some sort of structure so that it's identifiable. So something with closed questions, a rating scale of some sort, whereas I think about unstructured data that includes text, other data types, emails, IMs, forums, blogs. So where we are right now is really focusing on the structured data. So we do a lot of the data capture through IVR surveys, email surveys, surveys that are passively being held on websites, and we're capturing all that data. We are, for the most part, a B2B type of company. We're getting more, I shouldn't say focused, but we're sort of moving into a more B2C personal lines type of arena. So we're now starting to get into that unstructured data where we're now saying to really capture the full voice of the customer, we need to start looking at the unstructured data. So that's where we are right now.
Okay, thanks. Interesting. So, Greg, what are some other types of customer feedback that companies can apply? Greg?
Yeah. Seth already explained his differentiation between the structured and unstructured feedback. And we also look at it as, solicited and unsolicited feedback is another way of looking at it. So, for example, if you send an email to a customer asking for feedback, or if you ask them to participate in an IVR phone survey, that's solicited feedback. Whereas the unstructured, unsolicited feedback, such as social media, someone's posting something about your company on Twitter, or sharing a customer service experience that they had with your company on Facebook. But you also can have unsolicited feedback in a contact center. So if somebody calls to address a particular problem, and if you're recording that conversation, the customer may reveal a lot of insight about other issues with a product or a service in dealing with your organization that you would also want to capture as unsolicited, unstructured feedback, if you will. And we'll get into this a little later, but it's really important when you're selecting an EFM solution to make sure you have a partner and a solution that allows you to capture all types of feedback.
Thanks. Those are great points because, as I'm sure you know, customers don't always share certain intent or preferences through solicited feedback. These are things that companies can often pick up through the unsolicited feedback that can be sifted through.
That's right.
Right. Okay. So, Seth, what can customer feedback help companies to accomplish?
Well, there's a couple things. One is, and you see it here on the slide, and a lot of these sound fairly straightforward and intuitive, but let me dive into a few of them. The first one is to know how you're performing, and of course that seems fairly logical. But the piece here is that, and I'll utilize an example of, way back when cable companies were starting to expand coverage, or wireless phone companies, pick whichever one you feel is most appropriate. They really were, in a lot of instances, the only provider. And if you were to look at certain numbers, meaning growth numbers, you would potentially look at those companies and say, they're successful, they're growing, the top line's growing, so they must be doing things correctly. But the reality is that a lot of times people were buying those services because they were the only player in town. So my point in saying that is, with the voice of the customer data, there's so much data below the surface that you can really uncover and utilize. So, you might look at something and say, well, we're growing, so things are going well. But until you truly get the voice of the customer data, you may realize there are things brewing. The other thing that is very beneficial from a feedback perspective is the ability to fix things. and not guess. It's not anecdotal. It's not just not opinion. It's actual fact based from customers who are telling you, what's working and what's not working. Another theory or myth out there is that there are companies like Google and Apple that are they're just cool. It's in their DNA, and they know what products are going to be best for the consumers and what they're going to have an appetite for. And that's actually very far from the truth. In fact, they do more feedback sessions and use case testing than probably any other company. So they're out there garnering that feedback. In terms of how we're specifically using some of the feedback, one of the things that wasn't incredibly intuitive to me when we first started is how helpful it's been in our strategic planning process. So it's been a huge data point to bring to the table to say, gone are the days where, the person who has the loudest voice is getting the projects for next year. Rather, this year, literally, we had a separate department that I represented called Voice of the Customer that had a seat at the table, being able to help make decisions about what we, invest our capital in, which is fantastic. So we're literally saying, let's take an outside-in perspective based on the data that we've been able to pull, and let that drive the strategic planning process, which has been fantastic. And then last but not least is the ability to recognize appropriate behaviors. So, and we'll get into it when we talk more about the tool itself, but the ability to real-time provide feedback to people, both positively and where there are opportunities for improvement, has proven invaluable to our service organization.
Well, it sounds like you've found a number of places where you've been able to apply voice of the customer information.
Absolutely.
And Greg, from your perspective, what are some other ways that the companies can apply enterprise feedback from customers?
Yeah, Seth touched on quite a few already, but really it's all about using the customer feedback to focus on where you can make changes or improvements that will affect the largest number of customers, leading to increased customer satisfaction and then increased revenue, basically, for the organization. So you can use customer feedback to streamline business processes. We have one of our customers actually identified 100 separate business touch points that they were able to streamline and improve based on customer feedback. You can use customer feedback to save costs based on gathering information from customers about maybe operations or services that you're offering that are not well received or not valued by the customer. You can use, and Seth touched on this, a lot of our customers also use the feedback to train their employees, to make their employees more effective and more responsive to customer needs, again, based on feedback gathered from customers. And I'll give you one tangible example from one of our customers. We have a customer that, based on feedback, actually removed their phone tree when you first dialed into the company. And they initially, of course, installed that because the executives thought it was going to save a lot of money, it'll keep our reps off the phone, et cetera. But what they found from their customer, Voice of the Customer program is that the customers were so frustrated with the phone tree that they were dialing back again and again, to talk to operators to voice their displeasure with the phone tree. They were canceling their accounts because they were so upset with the experience. So based on that feedback, they removed the phone tree and now have a policy of answering every call with a live person within 60 seconds. And because of that one simple change, their customer satisfaction scores have gone through the roof, and they have actually seen a direct link to increased revenue per existing customer. So that's a really great example about how they thought they were going to save money by installing the phone tree, but by actually gathering customer information and taking action on it, they were able to increase their customer satisfaction dramatically.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, that's a great tangible example, and it also shows that sometimes the little things that we do can generate some of the biggest results.
Exactly.
So, Seth, what are some of the recommendations that you'd offer for getting started on a customer feedback program for people who are still coming up to speed with this?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. In terms of how to start, I think the first and sometimes the most difficult part of the process is the sponsorship or the buy-in component, because there's obviously there's a price tag with the actual tool and application, which again we'll talk about. There's an investment in the process, and there really needs to be a sort of a top-down understanding and commitment to a voice of the customer program. So it's more than just a tool. It's more than just a process. It's really a mindset that the organization needs to develop. So the sponsorship piece is critical. And to me, there's a couple questions or thoughts that I think are very relevant when having that conversation with your VP or president or CEO of the organization. It's how can we generate potentially more revenue from this? And I think that's a very fair question, an appropriate question to address. Where can we save money? What should we invest in? So by executing on a voice of the customer program, the thought is that it will help us to better allocate our resources, both from a capital and headcount perspective. And it will help us truly understand how we are really performing. So it's not just based on internal scorecards. It's not even just based on revenue or premium, which is obviously very important, but it's telling us how we're servicing the customer, and it's giving us leading and lagging indicators for our success. So I think from a sponsorship perspective, if you can address those items, you're well on your way. The other part that I think is very important is to really have the scope of the program and the process defined. So you want to make sure you have a very good understanding for how you will use the data and who will be involved in the process. So the last thing you want to do is get the buy-in, get a system, it's in there, and then you don't know what to do next. So I think outlining that process and what you're going to do with the data once you have it is critical. The other is tool selection. So we went down the path and looked at lots of different options and selected market tools, and we've been very happy with the capabilities that they have and the flexibility in the system. But you need to find a tool that works for you. And in speaking about the tool, one thing that I think is very important for people to understand and recognize is Market Tools, for example, has a plethora of capabilities, well beyond what we need right now. So one word of caution is to make sure that you bite this off in chunks as opposed to trying to boil the ocean in one fell swoop. So the tools are very potent and have a lot of great capabilities. It's just we need to go about it in a very logical and methodical way. Two other items, and then I'll wrap up on this. One is to ensure quick wins, and that's been very, very beneficial for us. And what I mean by that is, along the way, make sure that you're able to get some quick wins out of this, whether it's from an expense saving perspective, whether it's retention of a particular client base, whether it's changing the process, being more efficient. You need to have these quick wins to continue the momentum and make sure people are saying, you know what, this does make a lot of sense to continue. And then the last is making sure you have the ability to close the loop. And when I say that, I mean both internally as well as externally. So there's nothing worse than rolling this out and saying you're going to gather all this feedback, and then you don't do anything with the people that have responded to your surveys or blogs or forums. And then also, too, there's nothing worse than not being able to use the data internally with your employees or staff or what have you. So those are kind of the 5 phases that we went through, and in retrospect, I think are critically important in terms of how to start this VOC journey.
Thanks, Seth. These are great recommendations, and I would think that perhaps you learned some lessons along the way as you went about the rollout. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that a bit. What are some of the common challenges that are associated with rolling out enterprise feedback programs?
Yeah, I think that's it's true. I mean, I think when I think back on when we started, I think the sponsorship piece was critical, and I think that was difficult to do. And I think that the biggest lesson learned for me was really making sure that we had the process defined. So I think we were very eager to get started, and we had the tool, and we were ready to go, and we had a process defined, but it wasn't as defined as it probably could have been. So I think that certainly was something that if I could go back and do over, I would do that again. And the thing that certainly has been a challenge is making sure that you're able to utilize the appropriate benefits of the application. So there is a tremendous amount of flexibility and a tremendous amount of sort of capability, if you will, in the system, and it's really making sure that you're using just what you need at this point in time. So I mean, I think those are some of the challenges that we face, and at times we've done a good job, and at times we've had to course correct.
Okay, thanks, Seth. And Greg, from your vantage point, what are some common challenges that you see? And if you could speak to, steps that can be taken to mitigate those issues, that would be great.
Yeah. And, I'll touch on something that Seth mentioned, which is about defining the scope of the program and what you're really trying to accomplish. So when we work with our clients, especially with a new client, we find very often that they have hundreds of questions that they want answers to, and they want to ask all of their customers every question and get feedback on everything they can think of. And we really have to work with them to help them understand what is it that they really want to learn. And there's no use, our sort of maxim is don't ask a question unless you can actually take action on the feedback that you're gaining and making improvements. So we really help them define what are the core issues they're trying to uncover, who are the customers they want to survey and ask feedback from, how often do they want to do it. So really defining the scope is critically important, something that Seth mentioned. And also, again, echoing what Seth said, is that we encourage our clients to start small. So get a success early on with a simple question, simple survey, understand how you can actually take action based on the feedback, sort of do a little pilot, get a test run, and then look at expanding your program to uncover more information about different product lines or across regions, etc. So really, we encourage our customers to define that scope very specifically before we even start with any sort of VOC program.
And it's safe to assume that with a pilot program, you can also go back and do a postmortem to see, what did we learn along the way and how can we apply those lessons to a more extensive rollout.
That's exactly right. And especially with organizations who are new to voice of the customer and gathering feedback, it really helps you understand, all right, well, how do these results compare with what we thought we were going to learn? And how might we phrase this question differently moving forward? And how might we use the tool, in our case, Market Tools Customer Stat, what reports do we seem to rely on most often, et cetera? So it really helps you understand the process as well as the system that you're using for your Voice of the Customer program. So you just improve with time as you expand and roll out the programs. And we find that across all of our clients, really.
Okay, thanks. So, Seth, how do you follow up with customers on the feedback that they provide to Philadelphia insurance companies?
Yeah, and just one point that I just wanted to highlight, because I think it's important, and Greg mentioned it, is I think one of the things, if I were to, again, go back and do some post-mortem on the process, I think understanding the questions and really spending the appropriate time on the surveys is really a huge part of the process. So, you can see all the items listed below. There are three things that I think are really important. The first is having a definitive goal for the survey. Very similar to what Greg said. He's saying make sure you can take action on every single question, which I think is something that we hold to. And so having a goal for these surveys is very, very important. The other thing that I've learned along the way is just how important that invitation is. So crafting that invitation is essential. And we actually came up with what we wanted to do and then let let the experts actually craft the verbiage, if you will, around the invitation, because I think that's with how much data and emails and everything people are getting on a daily basis, crafting it is very, 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 very important. And then the last item is, however many questions you have, typically you're going to want to cut it in half. So the idea is to shorten the survey. You want to make it short and sweet and to the point.
Okay, thanks, Seth. Greg, can you speak to some of the key characteristics and functionality that companies should look for in a customer feedback system?
Yeah, certainly. We touched on one a little earlier, and that's really the ability to collect and analyze feedback from all channels. Structured and unstructured feedback, feedback from social media channels, and then the ability to actually analyze that data and compare it with feedback gathered through more traditional means, such as email surveys, etc. So that's really important. All the different listening channels or feedback collection channels that the solution offers is something that the organization should be concerned with. And then also, we think it's very important that whatever tool you use should have a closed loop process that actually allows you to take action on the feedback that you're receiving, follow up with the customer. The follow-up with the customer is critically important. So they've told you what they want to tell you, so it's really important you owe them some sort of response. And so you need a system that allows you to set up alerts so people understand, okay, when a score falls below a certain level, I want management to understand what's going on so we can follow up with that customer or that customer group. So a whole series of what we call action management and closed-loop functionality is critically important for any sort of EFM solution you're looking at. And then also reporting is critical. So in a couple minutes, I'll talk a little bit about the history of Voice of the Customer programs in EFM. And historically, people gathered feedback, got reams and reams of data and reports, and flipped through it and said, okay, well, what do we do now? So we think it's really important that whatever EFM system you use should have very flexible and detailed reporting that gets the right information into the hands of the right people. So we have something called adaptive role-based reporting, where you can actually determine within your organization, for example, executives might get certain types of dashboards. A supervisor in a contact center might get a different type of dashboard. Even a frontline contact center agent should be aware of what sort of feedback they're garnering on behalf from their customers. So really a way to put the data and the feedback into the hands of the people who can actually take action to influence the customer experience, and that's also critically important. So there's a whole list, but I think those are kind of three key things that customers should look for in choosing an EFM solution.
Thanks, Greg. These are great recommendations. So, Seth, as you looked at and evaluated Voice of the Customer platforms that were available, what were some of the key characteristics and functionality that you looked for then, and perhaps things you discovered that you needed as you were going through the journey?
Yeah, well, it was ironic as Greg was going through his list. I mean, those were the items. I mean, the first one was making sure that the application of the tool was flexible, so that we had control over what we wanted to do, and in terms of setting up tables and reports, and certainly that was a big piece, was the flexibility. The second was the ability to analyze, but also have the system analyze the data for us. So we have a tremendous amount of daily analysis happening that has been very, very helpful in terms of not only what is a particular score, like we're receiving a high or low score, but what's actually driving that score. Is it professionalism of the contact center rep? Was it the experience that they had on the website? Was it the whole time that they experienced? So all of that is being done for me on a daily basis, so I can go in and make educated decisions based on the analysis that's being done. So flexibility, the ability to analyze, and the reporting piece are huge. And the one piece that Greg mentioned that I think is fantastic and we use is the role-based dashboards. So Our CEO has a specific dashboard that he goes into that's fairly high level, enterprise wide, and that looks very different than our contact center supervisor, who has very tactical actions that they need to take and has all their direct reports rolled up. So the dashboard views are very, very nice and very convenient for our different stakeholders.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for sharing those. So, Greg, we've heard a lot from Seth about how Philadelphia Insurance Companies has gone about implementing and making use of their voice of the customer platform and processes and techniques. Can you share with us examples of other companies that have implemented successful enterprise feedback management programs and what they've done well?
Yeah, sure. Actually, I have a slide here highlighting just a few of our customer case studies, if you will, and some of the business results that they were able to accomplish using their Voice of the Customer program with MarketTools customers. I'll just touch on a couple of these. So the first one is Salesforce. So Salesforce.com has been a customer of ours for over 10 years now, and they've been running partner relationship studies with us. So I also want to take this opportunity to point out that we've been talking about Voice of the Customer, but it's also important to understand that Voice of the Partner and Voice of the Employee programs are also critical to understanding how to influence your business results, right? So really getting a holistic view, if you have a type of business that deals with partners, understanding what your partners are happy about or what might change, and then also gathering feedback from your employees to make your company just more efficient and a happier place to work. And there's a lot of studies that demonstrate that the more satisfied your employees are, in turn, the more satisfied your customers are going to be, especially if you have customer-facing employees. So back to Salesforce. So we've been doing partner studies with them for the past 10 years, and they really take advantage of our closed-loop process and our action management capabilities. So they actually have alerts set up that will be triggered whenever a partner gives a rating below a certain threshold on any sort of follow-up partner survey. And they have a policy that they actually follow up and close the loop on every single one of those issues. So they use those alerts that are triggered to follow up with the partner and really understand what the issue is, how they might fix it, gather the feedback. And as a result, they have a partner retention and recommendation rate of 94%. Which is what you're seeing on the slide, and that is for those of us in the audience who are in a software environment, et cetera, like Salesforce is. That's amazing to have a 94% recommendation rate from your partner community, especially given the thousands of partners that Salesforce works with. Another example I'll give is CareFusion. CareFusion is a leading provider of medical devices, insulin pumps, and different sort of devices used at hospitals and clinics throughout the world, really. And with CareFusion, with them, we run transactional surveys to follow up on contact center interactions. So if a clinic or a hospital calls CareFusion about operating the machinery or if it seems to be malfunctioning, et cetera, they collect all that feedback, and then they use our key driver charts in customer sat, which allows you to identify which areas really are most important to the customers and have the greatest influence on overall satisfaction. So they use a lot of our sophisticated analysis, I'm sure pretty similar to the types of reporting and analysis that Seth uses over at Philadelphia Insurance, and they have a 90% overall customer satisfaction rate. And so I really don't want to tell you what that satisfaction rate was before CareFusion started working with us and using MarketTools customer sat, but suffice to say it was much lower. And so, they're thrilled. Within the 3 years or so we've been working with CareFusion, they've been able to get that satisfaction rate over 90%, which actually exceeds their initial goal for that. So just a couple of examples, business process changes, cost savings, and we're very happy because we believe that our success is tied to the success of our customers. I'm always, proud to highlight the success our customers have had.
Okay, thanks. That's terrific. Those are great examples. So, Seth, can you tell us a little bit about some of the impact that your company is seeing in the market because of this? What's some of the tangible value that you're seeing?
Sure. Well, there's a couple things that we actually that we've actually instituted that I think would sort of fall into the category of quick wins, and I can tell you a little bit about some of the actual benefits. But we actually use the NPS score, which is the Net Promoter Score, as part of the Voice of the Customer program. And whenever we actually have a detractor, so someone that's actually giving us a score of 4 or less within the NPS, that automatically gets triggered to a regional vice president. So it knows based on the location where to go. And this regional vice president will get this email or this alert that basically states that someone, an agent or a policyholder, is clearly not satisfied with the services that we've provided them. And it gives them the ability to, it's not proactive, but certainly gives them the ability to react very, very quickly. And we have a 24-hour turnaround time on that. Typically, they're calling, as soon as they get the message, and that's been a huge win for us. We also do daily alerts, so we do that at the individual level. So when they get a very, very high score or low score, the individuals are being notified of that. We send weekly data to our executive team that basically says, here are all the items that came through this week that are open or pending or that we want them to be aware of. And there are many, many instances, and we've defined this for them, as to when the president or the CEO of our company actually picks up the phone and calls someone that scored a 4 or less. And then this is part of our monthly operating review, and it's, as I mentioned before, part of our annual strategic planning process. And to get even a little bit more granular, through the Voice of the Customer program and the data that we were able to mine, we realized that our retention level on a particular line of business was receding to a point that was making us not feel very good about it. And we started to uncover, when we actually were able to look at the data by product, we realized that there were a lot of comments about people not receiving reminder notices. And about 3 weeks prior to that, we made a decision across the enterprise to remove reminder notices. And there was no feedback from anyone else except for people within this specific product. And so what we did was, for that specific product, we brought back the reminder notices, and our renewal retention rate went from 41% to 50% over a 2-month period of time. And that nets out to a significant, that basically pays for the entire Voice of the Customer program for 2 years. But by just making that one simple change that we never would have been able to realize or understand had we not had the Voice of the Customer data.
That's impressive, and it sounds like there have been a number of areas where you've been able to apply Voice of the Customer to operations on a regular basis.
Yeah, there's no doubt. We've been able to do it, and as Greg mentioned before, we've been able to use it for enhanced training. So we're making sure that people are getting real live feedback from the customers and improving, if you will, the performance of the individuals. It's part of their monthly business objectives that they all have, is now the score that they get from their Voice of the Customer piece. There's now Voice of the Customer as a department almost that has a seat at the table from a strategic planning process perspective. And then there are all the other quick wins from a process and procedural perspective that are saving us money or increasing revenue by some small amount. And we're really chipping away at this thing. So the whole Voice of the Customer program has really, I think, enveloped the organization, and it's taken over, which is fantastic.
That sounds great, Seth. Thanks for sharing that. So, Greg, can you give us a sense as to where Voice of the Customer, how it has evolved and where it's headed?
Yeah, certainly. Just a couple minutes on how we view the evolution of EFM. If we can remember way back into the 1990s, there were a lot of loyalty consulting firms that would come in and help you get to the heart of your customer issues. And generally, they would come in, they would call customers, perhaps field paper surveys, and then they would compile the information. It would take months to create reports. Then, as I mentioned earlier, they would come in and present, hundreds of PowerPoint slides looking at the data. You'd have, multi-volume report, again, analyzing the data, but there was really what could you do with that information? There was very little direction as far as how to follow up, how to fundamentally change what you're doing in order to increase the customer satisfaction. And it's important to note that in many cases, the results were being shared, 6 to 9 months after the actual customer feedback was given. So really useless information, I think it's fair to say. You might be able to make a couple changes, but not really the types of changes that influence your business results. Then in the 2000s, we saw really the first generation of satisfaction surveys, the first email surveys, online surveys, et cetera, where you could report on a satisfaction of your customers, a relationship satisfaction survey. Maybe the information would go to a handful of executives, but generally not shared throughout the organization. And again, there were no tools for closed-loop processes or taking action. It was pretty much gathering the information more quickly than with loyalty consulting, but again, very difficult to take action on it. And so then that brings us to today. And in fact, Philadelphia Insurance and Seth are ideal example of what can be done with the powerful EFM solutions today is you can really handle high volume transactional surveys that could go out every single minute or every time a transaction happens. Global surveys with localizations and translations, enterprise-wide surveys that touch your customers wherever they're touching your organization. We talked about very helpful, powerful role-specific reports. You're getting the information into the hands of the people who can actually make changes. So not just in the executive suite where the rest of the employees don't really understand their role in the customer experience. And then a level of integration with business systems like ERP systems and CRM systems, et cetera, so you can share information and data across the systems. Very, very powerful, which did not exist before EFM solutions. So again, just kind of interesting to look at the history, and we really believe that this is the time for voice of the customer programs and employee feedback management. It's really taking off, and we're seeing it with our customers every day.
Okay, thanks. That sounds great. So I want to thank you, Greg, and also you, Seth, for all the insights that you've shared with us so far. And now we're going to jump into our audience Q&A with our presenters. Before we do, just a few reminders. For a copy of today's presentation, please click on the green PDF icon. And if you encounter any issues with the PDF download, please let us know by clicking on the yellow question mark for help with this or any other technical issues. Also, if you have a question for our presenters, please click on the red Q&A icon and then enter your question and then click Submit. As a reminder, contact information for Market Tools and One-to-One Media will be posted at the end of our event. And I'd also like to remind everyone about the survey that will be posted during our Q&A period. Please take a moment to participate. Again, if you do want to participate, you'll need to turn off your pop-up blockers to enable the survey. So now on to the Q&A. And this first question is for both Greg and Seth, but Greg, if you could answer this first. Generally speaking, how long does it take to get up and running with a Voice of the Customer program?
All right. Okay. So we talked a little bit about, defining the scope of your program and understanding what you really want to learn from the program, getting executive buy-in. So that's a process that happens internally, which, varies based on the organization. But once you've made the decision that you want to go forward with a Voice of the Customer program and engage with a provider such as Market Tools, with our Customer Sat product, we generally find that we can get programs up and running within about 6 to 8 weeks, maybe 10 weeks on the outside. And again, that is from setup of the solution, understanding what the company's goals are, fielding your initial surveys, analyzing the results, and actually taking action to affect change. We see that in about 6 to 8 weeks. And I think Seth can probably give more detail about what his experience was.
Yeah, just very similar to what you just outlined. So I think from beginning to end, and we did it in phases, if you will, but from the minute that we decided we wanted to do it until we had our first survey and data coming in, I don't think it was more than 6.5, 7 weeks. So it's certainly not a 6-month or a year-long investment in time. It can be very, very quick.
Right. And also, I probably should point out too that when you're looking at your EFM vendor, if they can't get what you need within 6 to 8 weeks, and if it requires a lot of customization, and if your program is too unique for them, and they need to build new software modules, that should be a red flag, because the solution should be robust enough and fully featured enough that you can get what you need within about 6 to 8 weeks.
Good point. So, Seth, just as a follow-up then, as you went about rolling out the platform and program, and you mentioned that you did this in phases, were there any particular phases that, as you look back on it, required extra attention?
No, not particularly. I mean, I think for us, the reason why what we did was we decided to phase in the various surveys. So, like I said at the very beginning, we had surveys from our website. We were conducting annual customer service, customer satisfaction surveys. We were doing surveys from our contact center reps, so more transactional type surveys. So instead of doing everything at once, we took one survey, we implemented that, we put the process in place for what we're going to do with the data. We got some lessons learned. Then we moved on to the next survey, got some lessons learned, and then moved on to the third, which I think is a very good way of doing it as opposed to just pulling all this data in and sort of being overwhelmed by the data. So we actually, and we were advised by Market Tools to do that. I think it's a very intelligent and sort of appropriate way to implement a Voice of the Customer program.
That sounds like it worked out well for you as well.
It did.
So, Seth, I know you talked earlier about how Philadelphia insurance companies is starting to gravitate more towards B2C data and B2C customers as well, but are there any particulars to collecting B2B customer data that Voice of the Customer practitioners should be aware of?
Well, I think there's, if I were to sort of take that up a level, I would say that, when you're thinking about the overall program, to me there's 5 things that you need to have, and I was thinking about this earlier. One is you have to have a good system, and you have to have a mechanism in place to capture and trend the data. So, it's very difficult to be successful with a VOC program without that. So, good system, good mechanism to capture and trend the data. The second, I mentioned this before, is to have a strong process behind it. So, what are you going to do with the data, and how are you going to, sort of utilize the rich data that you're getting? The third is the sponsorship piece. You have to have that. The fourth, and we talked about this as well, is making sure that you have good, sound surveys. People should not overlook this particular step because it's a critical component to a VOC program. And then the last piece is having surround sound, or what I call surround sound. It's making sure that you're really having a full view of the customer's feedback, if you will. So making sure you're capturing it from the web, from the contact center, from instant messages, from blogs, from forums. And you also need to think about, what about the people that aren't responding? Because those are your customers as well. So just making sure that you have a very good representation of your customer base. So good system and mechanism, strong process, sponsorship, good surveys, and surround sound. And I think if people can execute on those, they're going to be very successful.
These are good points. Thanks. So, and it also sounds like as you're thinking through this as a group, thinking about what should be contained in the survey itself, you're also thinking about what is it that we're trying to solicit from our customers? What kind of feedback are we trying to get?
That's exactly right. What are we trying to learn from the data? And as Greg said perfectly, it's what sort of action are we wanting to take on each one of these, survey questions. And I think that's very important. There shouldn't be a survey question out there that you can't react to.
So, Seth, we had also spoken before about the use of unstructured data, from social media, that's in the contact center, and in other channels and touch points. Are you beginning to explore the use of unstructured data within your company? And if you can describe for us where you are at this part of the journey, that would be great.
Sure. We are just at the beginning stages of starting to utilize the unstructured data. So right now we're not using any level of sophistication in terms of tools. Now, market tools and other vendors have things like text analytics and software that can actually go out there and proactively mine the data. All we're doing right now is trying to understand what's out there in terms of unstructured data, how we can potentially use it, and what the process needs to be afterwards. So before we go and buy another piece of the application, we want to make sure that, we can use this. Right now we have a very small part of our overall business that's, more personal lines or B2C that, where they're utilizing web, forums, blogs, and so we're literally at the beginning stages of the journey of looking at how do we use that in our advantage or to our advantage going forward.
And determining, what information or what channels would be useful to use as well.
Absolutely, but there's a lot, and Greg, I'm sure you can attest to this. There's a lot of research being done and statements made about the power of unstructured data and just how much is out there. So they're actually, I've seen percentages of, 80% for B2C companies, 80% of the overall voice of the customers is typically being generated from unstructured data. So it's definitely something that all of us need to strongly consider going forward.
Thanks, Seth. So, Greg, we've spoken quite a bit about, both you and Seth have spoken about steps that should be taken to launch Voice of the Customer programs. But can you also share with us some recommendations for keeping these programs sustainable, keeping them alive and thriving?
Yeah, really the best way to keep these programs alive and thriving is to demonstrate results. And I shared, some results of some of our clients, and that's really what gets the attention of the executives within an organization, understanding the true value that the program is delivering. And Tom, one of your earlier slides, it came from that Forrester research, which is that customers are finding it difficult to actually match the Voice of the Customer program, the results, to actual business results. We have dozens and dozens of case studies that do that mapping, and that's, I think, probably one of the reasons why, just recently Forrester named Market Tools a leader in the EFM space, because we can demonstrate time and time and again the value that our customers are receiving from their Voice of the Customer program. So I think that really, simply said, is the way to, continue programs. That's why we've had customers, I mentioned, Salesforce has been with us for 10 years. We've had other customers with us, 7, 8 years. And, of course, they wouldn't have been with us that long if they didn't feel they were getting tremendous value out of their programs.
Thanks for that. And, it also sounds like, it's a continuous journey where companies have to continue to learn from their programs and how they can improve them, including what customer data to use and act on, and also which business metrics they should be applying these against.
Yeah, that's right. And, and the world is dynamic. And so 3 years ago, we weren't talking about using unstructured data and social media for customer feedback. And now it's top of mind for most of our customers, and we have capabilities within within our solution to take advantage of that. And companies, launching new products, going globally, opening new regions, yes, it's an ever-changing discipline, if you will, and that's what makes it exciting for us at Market Tools, is we can partner with our customers as their businesses and their needs change.
Okay, thanks, Greg. So, Seth, before we sign off, any final thoughts?
No, I think that, I certainly, I think that the big thing, the big items I went through, the sponsorship, the process, having a good tool, I think those are obviously critical. And then Greg just mentioned the other piece, which is, making sure that everything that is being done proves or has some business value. And the quick wins is another way to continue that momentum that's being built. So, we've had a very successful program. It hasn't been perfect, but, we've been able to generate very nice bottom line benefits, and, it's worked out very, very nicely for us.
Okay, thanks, Seth. Well, thanks again to Seth Hall and to Greg Merrick for sharing their terrific insights with us today. And thank you all for joining us as well. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, so any unanswered questions will be addressed by email. This concludes 7 Steps to Building a Profitable Voice of the Customer program, a one-to-one webinar sponsored by Market Tools. On behalf of the entire team, thanks for attending and have a great day.